Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining our series. We're really glad to see you here. I'm attorney Nick Sally, and I'm here with my colleagues and friends, Kana Lavolsi and Parker Golson. We have an incredible guest for you today who has such gems of wisdom for us all. I want to introduce to you David Cherrie. He is the CEO and co-founder of Arcade, 500 Startups alumni, Robotics and Mechatronics Engineer, and he is an Aussie in Texas. So David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Kana, kick it over to you.
Perfect. So David, we kind of want to just jump in today and learn a little bit more about what you're doing at Arcade. You and I, of course, know from our previous conversation that you're doing something pretty amazing and exciting, and we want the audience to see. So.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. I'm excited to chat with you all today. With Arcade, we're really solving the problem of disengaged employees in repetitive jobs. And that looks like sales, service, any job where you've got a very quantifiable outcome, but it's the same thing day in, day out. And so I used to, while studying at college, or we call it uni in Australia, I used to work in retail part-time, as a lot of college kids do. And, I loved the job for the first few months, but after about 4 or 5 months, it just became Groundhog Day. And that just completely disempowered me. It felt like another cog in the wheel. And so in order to make work more fun and fulfilling, we turned it into a game. We turned every day the goals that our manager had into like some fun, collaborative and competitive games that we got to play as staff. And that just changed everything. Our attitudes changed. We galvanized as a group. And then obviously that affected our productivity, our output. Our customers were happier. They were coming back, and within 6 or so months, we'd become the top performing location in the country. And that was really the genesis of Arcade. And so what we're doing is we're helping business leaders transform their repetitive day in, day out tasks and goals into fun, gamified incentives for their employees that are adaptive. So they're actually rewarding and recognizing and challenging each employee individually. And then we link that to not only intrinsic motivators that employees have, but also extrinsic things like real-time recognition. We partner with about 250 brands to offer real rewards within the platforms that employees. And what we really believe is that the future of employee engagement is this intersection between engagement, which is kind of this fluffy thing that nobody really quite understands but knows is super important, and performance management, which is that kind of quantifiable driving outcomes. So we're really intersecting the two, and we call it performance engagement. And so, what we're doing is we're helping these managers who are really trying to motivate all of their team, not just the top performers, but everybody to stay in the game on a day-to-day basis. And so, yeah, we do that. We started in retail, and then we started to really branch out and realize, boy, there's a lot of companies and there's a lot of teams out there who are struggling day-to-day to make work really fun and fulfilling for their teams. So we're there to help.
Amazing. We love what you're doing. We're big fans of gamification. And I feel like what you have is really a future-facing technology in the first place. But do you feel like that with everything that's happened with COVID, that you have had to make certain pivots to adjust, or do you think you are already on that path?
It's a good question. I think, everybody's going to have probably a different story. For us, it was less about pivoting what we were doing, because what we've developed essentially is a solution we had retail employees and retail teams in mind, which are inherently distributed both geographically, but also on a time basis. They work different shifts and things. So how do you keep a distributed team hyper engaged? So we were solving that problem already, but it certainly changed our messaging. Both in retail, we had to become mission critical, especially if retail is going through a difficult time with the shutdowns. But it was also about realizing, hey, this is a huge, we can see this as a real downer, or we can approach Q2, which is, in Australia, it's Q4 because we have a different fiscal year. But we were coming into March, obviously hopeful, but, everything shut down end of March. And so we had to think about, okay, well, what is the opportunity here? Because I think there's always two sides to a coin. And the reality was every single team almost on the entire planet had, within a week's period, gone distributed. And so it meant that, boy, there's a lot of companies, and now there's a lot of managers panicking. How do I get control of this situation? And obviously we solve a part of that, and that is ensuring that those managers can keep their team, ensure that they're having fun and they're being rewarded and they're being recognized and challenged, and that the manager is actually achieving real world outcomes and driving performance across their team. So what we did was we took the approach of, how can we support our current customers? Number one, it was we reached out to every single one of our, and our approach was, look, we're just going to do whatever we can to support. If that looks like, getting on the phone and understanding, like, if they're in financial trouble, we were going to help there. But then it also looked like, how do we support team managers who are probably going through a crisis of their own, and we have a solution that can really help there. And so that's how we approached the situation.
Got it. That was really, really awesome to hear. I'm curious, as you talked about the teams being distributed and people going from one moment all over the world, from being together to being distributed. In your opinion, then, what are some other challenges we're facing from a global lens? And what are some of the solutions that there, might be for some of those challenges on that global scale?
Well, I think, look, at a global lens, I think there's a lot of challenges we're going to face around misinformation. I think that is something that everybody's suffering from. And quite frankly, I think that's partly to do with, I'm sure there's prerogatives in there that are political, things like that. But there's also just, I think it hit everybody like a ton of bricks, including leaders, and I think, I would really hate to be, I don't envy the positions of anybody in governance right now, because it's a really tough situation to be in. So I think there's going to be, I think, a sense of empathy that we struggle with globally. And I see that in Australia. Like, in Australia, we have Melbourne, where I'm from, which is currently going through a lot of, an incredibly strict shutdown, to the point where you can't even leave your house pretty much. And it doesn't look like there's an end in sight. And then you've got the same country, but, a little further up the beach, you've got Queensland, which is by and large not as restrictive, a bit like us in Texas, where you can get out and about. So I think what I'm seeing, at least globally from my point of view, is there's a lot of people, they're looking for answers. There's a lot of leaders that don't have answers, or the answers are going to disrupt some people and others. And so I think that there's going to be a challenge of building trust back again, our information systems, and also being able to empathize with our leaders. And that's globally. I don't think anybody is going to come out of this unscathed, but I do think that that's going to be kind of a more global problem of getting people to realize, hey, we're all humans, we're all in the same boat, and it sucks, this situation. So, and then from a technology standpoint and from just a future trend standpoint, look, I don't know. Within a month, I kind of got used to the lockdowns. I didn't enjoy it, and I missed the old times, but it felt like years ago I could go to a restaurant. Like at the time it was like, boy, I don't even remember what it was like to walk outside without a mask. So as humans, we're super adaptive. And I think that what happens is we're also very reactive, very emotional. And so I think right now we're looking at, oh, wow, there's going to be all these trends that come out. And that by and large is true. I think it has certainly expedited a lot of, upcoming things. Like, I think the hybrid between work from home and working remote has been expedited big time. And so I think there'll be some industries like commercial real estate that will suffer a little bit there, but but then I also think that there's also going to be a lot of things that go back to normal, to be honest. And we don't remember that, but I think, give it 6 weeks after we've got a vaccine and lockdowns are over and whatever it is, I think people will be back into the swing of things. So, it's interesting. Don't want to really sit on the fence with it, but I do think obviously tools that help with, a hybrid between work from home and working remote will definitely be, I say that just genuinely. I think that we're very fortunate. Part of running a startup is obviously a decent idea, great execution, and perfect timing. So I think that for us, it was just very fortunate that we happen to be in a space that I think is going to be a very, growing segment, for a long time. But from a larger standpoint, I think a lot of things will go back to normal, and then there'll be some industries like I think commercial real estate will really suffer.
Yeah, so building off of that, do you feel like that there was a bit of information that you wish you had, or something in your toolkit that you wish you did have kind of going into the spring, going into early March that you didn't?
Yeah, invest in Zoom. Look, I think, I guess, from a business standpoint, it would have been great to, I think everyone, you can talk about like seeing the future, but it would have been great to have a good understanding of how to, I think for us, suddenly the world became our total addressable market in a sense. Like there's pretty much every industry. That was already our plan, right? We already believed that we were applicable not only to sales teams, but service teams and engineers. Like we really do believe we can bring a solution to every kind of functional department within an organization. And so we already had accountants and law firms and things like that as customers, but it wasn't our primary target. Obviously, we were focused on revenue driving teams in retail, in automotive, and in inside sales. So what I think I would have loved is some information on how do I now position a message and market and talk to all these other industries that are super interested in what we do, because quite frankly, that's a lot of domain expertise that we didn't have at the time. We obviously have studied up and done a lot of research since, but it would have been great to have all of that already. But at the end of the day, that's not that problematic. We've got a great team of incredibly smart people and great marketing partners and things like that have helped us really message our product and solution to the industries that need it most. But then I think from a hindsight, from just like a life perspective, probably two things. How it affected me? To be honest, it did get pretty tough, So I think, and what's interesting was I literally flew in the day that the shutdowns happened. So I was in Australia for a wedding and I landed in LAX right when there was like the European shutdown, like they weren't accepting flights from Europe. And then the next day we went into shelter in place. And that happened to be the same day I was moving apartments. So I haven't had the chance to use the pool or the gym or anything at my new place, but so it, knowing how it would affect me personally, I think there's a lot of introspection that you kind of get in a very short period of time when you're stuck with yourself, and you don't have all the distractions you typically have. And then from a just life scenario, I guess, geopolitical sense, I would have loved to have more information about what the heck this thing was and what the risks were, just so that I could, because I think that was the difficult part. No one really had any true information. It was changing every week. So, obviously those are probably the things I think most people would say. But that's what I would have wished I knew.
Definitely. And that being said, with all the distractions that are happening, I feel like with Arcade, you're kind of helping take away some of those distractions because people have a little bit more motivation with every task, right? But in this kind of weird like vortex of 2020, how do you feel like your team's been able to manage like both internally and vendors during this time? Do you feel like you've stepped up to the challenge pretty well, or have you seen people do it well or do it poorly?
So, I think for us, talking business-wise, how we've handled it as a company. Look, we actually had gone through a bit of an adjustment at the start of the year. So we had some tough decisions to make. We're about to raise, we're in the middle of raising, funds, and it's a big round, and so that takes time. And so we made some decisions as a startup, obviously, we're looking at how do we increase runway? How do we make sure so we came into the year with a couple of tough decisions to make. And one of the decisions we made was to decide to go fully remote. Now, that didn't mean that we were kind of mandating it was remote. We still had office space, co-work space that our team could go visit, and that kind of thing. But what we had already decided to do was pretty much get everybody to work from home and give them stipends and things like that. We also have a tool, and I think it's really important. We call it drinking in Australia. I don't know if it's very popular, but I call it drink your own bathwater. It's eat your own cooking. That's what we do. We help remote distributed teams stay engaged, stay connected, and stay motivated. And so we're already a team that was inherently distributed in that we have half our team in Australia and the other half here in the US. And now we've got employees in Canada and across different time zones in the US. And so we were already kind of building a kind of remote first company. And so this was the next phase to that. It was like an inflection point and a challenge that we were really excited to take. And that even if you lived in the same city, you're now working from home primarily. And so I think because we had made those decisions, and hindsight's 2020, and it was completely serendipitous, but we hit March 20th or whenever shelter in place happened, and it was literally business as usual for us. So that was fortunate. I think some of the areas that we could have done better would be, I think, understanding the mental health impact it takes on employees. That's definitely something we could have done better, especially I think in Australia, it's winter right now, and they have 10 times more restrictive kind of things in place for the population. And so I think for us, we are obviously enacting those changes, but I think just understanding, hey, this is going to affect people differently. And our mandate as a company is we want to be the reason over 1 million people are happier and more fulfilled at work. And that starts with the team in Arcade. We need to be the first group of those people, right? And so that's something we want, an ethos we live by. And I think going into a global pandemic, as a leader, you're just not really thinking what are the sorts of impacts that are going to happen here. And so that's what we did well, just by serendipity. That's where we could have done better, I think. And then have I seen other people do it poorly or well? I must say that I think everybody, everyone I've talked to, every founder and leader in a business unit or team has pretty much said the same thing. It's look, I don't know the answer here, but there are some fundamentals that you stick by. People in your team, you need to make sure that they're protected, that they feel like they're going to be okay, and that you're not asking them to come into the office when there's shutdowns and forcing them, things like that. There's also we look to business leaders that went through the GFC in 08. There have been times where there is a national overnight kind of crisis, and that really affects business. Although it's not a pandemic, and there's a lot of obviously macro factors that you can't really plan for. Leaders have gone through crises before, so look to them. What did they do? How did they take an objective look? That was part of the challenge. We had to sit down and take an objective look at our company. What's our value proposition? Are we valuable to businesses, or are we a nice to have? And I think that that's a tough conversation to have, but it's the right one. And I think, you know, as a startup, one of your best your best attributes is that you can be malleable and you can be quick. And so you can, if you obviously have the right people in the room with great ideas and the ability to execute, you can make small pivots that do position you the right way. So, you know, I really do feel, I think there's going to be, the too big to fails, and then just not big enoughs, you know, that are going to fail. And we're seeing a lot of that happening, especially in some key industries. So that's tough for them, because they're cruise ships and they can't turn it around fast enough, but they're not big enough to not fail, right? So and so anyway, that's probably how I would answer that question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kana or Nick, did either of y'all have any other questions before we start to wrap?
No, I think this was beautiful. Nothing further on my end before we close. Kana?
So this is just a question I've been playing with, but is there anything that you thought was really odd or funny or interesting in terms of numbers or campaigns or any other moves you saw during COVID that you were just very surprised by and you wouldn't have expected?
That is a good question. Is there anything that's been taking me by surprise? Yeah, I would say, well, I think it's also very, it's very unfortunate in my mind that it's also an election year. So there's like a ton of stuff going on that's got really nothing to do with the pandemic and everything to do with politics. And so I think from a societal standpoint, I was very, I guess, concerned with like all the craziness that just happened. Like, and I'm in Dallas where we had a lot of craziness. And so that was surprising to me. And that's the first time I've been through something so close to home. And so, you know, coming from Australia, suburbia Australia to, you know, the big smoke and in the biggest kind of country, you know, so it's kind of like, that was a bit crazy. In terms of like trends, I guess, look, honestly, I didn't expect to see as many kind of people getting onto like the TikTok and stuff. Like it's got nothing to do with business, but like that kind of blew up, and I was amazed at how many, like, because my thought would be people would be like concerned, they'd be looking for like, how do I make ends meet, like, you know, and I was just amazed at how many people like turn to just those kind of video making platforms and mobile games and stuff. But I guess that makes sense in a way. It's like a distraction and people got bored and things like that. But it wasn't like, I don't think there was anything like amazingly out there. I'd be interested though to ask you, what's been the answer that you have for that question?
Ooh, good question. I feel like it's interesting to me because, I mean, a lot of the things were predictable, right? Like we're going back towards more digitization, more emotional intelligence and marketing, more connection with people, which is something that was already heading that way. We just advanced marketing several years, right? Which is amazing. I think that one thing that's been kind of weird and interesting is the return to the value of old school marketing techniques. Like there's a lot more like paid ads and SEO have been one of the more effective things. But I think I thought the KFC having to change their finger looking good campaign or slogan was a pretty funny thing that I did not see coming out of the pandemic. So it's just like people really thinking through things in a very funny way. So.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. Maybe just the need to make marketing more, even more attractive and you know, funny and interesting, because people are super distracted now. Like they're at home, they have everything around them. I will say really quickly, because I think having a little bit more time to think about it, I will say I was actually amazed at how much money has actually been put into employee incentives. I actually thought that that would be pulled away. And at least from the trends that I've seen from other companies in our space, the growth rates, like, so we've grown incredibly, but we obviously do like the motivation and productivity stuff, but companies that just do employee incentives, I've seen a lot of growth there. And that was really interesting to me, because that would have been something that I would have assumed companies would cut, especially going into like, but maybe that was one of the things that they were like having to invest into big time, because, you know, employees' mental health and engagement and all that kind of stuff would have probably been taking a hit. So that's something I didn't see, to be honest. But yeah, that's very interesting and great question.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this today. Parker, Nick, anything else?
No, that is it. We really appreciate you joining us today, and again, giving us all these nuggets of gold. Very generous insights that you've given us. So yeah, with that, I will just say thank you for participating in our series. This is super fun to hear from all of these experts, and we are the Interim Expert Team. And so thank you again for participating, and we'll see you all in the next video. Take care.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Bye.